The gravel crunches under worn shoes as an elderly woman steps out of a sedan onto a dirt road in rural Iowa. Kimiko Nakamura is 86 years old now, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hands trembling slightly as she clutches a faded photograph. The image shows a young woman, barely 18, standing beside a tall American soldier in uniform, both of them smiling uncertainly at the camera. Behind her, Rachel Chen adjusts her camera equipment, watching the old woman's face carefully, noting every micro-expression, every hesitation, every moment of recognition. The farmhouse stands ahead, weathered white paint peeling from wooden boards, windows dark and empty like the eyes of something long dead. It has been 40 years since Kimiko last stood here. 40 years since she fled this place with her husband and son, vowing never to return, swearing she would sooner die than set foot on this property again. But memory, she has learned, does not honor vows. It pulls you back whether you are ready or not, dragging you through time like an anchor tied to your chest. Rachel approaches gently, her voice soft with practiced empathy, asking if she needs a moment. Kimiko shakes her head. She has waited long enough. She has spent 4 decades trying to forget, and has learned that forgetting is impossible. The wind sweeps across the cornfields, carrying with it the smell of earth and rain and something else, something older, the accumulated weight of everything that has happened on this land. It is the same smell that greeted her in 1947, when she arrived as a teenage bride from Hiroshima, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a heart full of hope that would soon learn to protect itself by becoming smaller, quieter, nearly invisible. The front door is unlocked. The current owners, a retired couple named the Johnsons who moved here 5 years ago from Des Moines, have graciously allowed this visit. They know nothing of what happened in this house decades ago. They only know it has good bones, solid foundation, a kitchen that gets beautiful morning light. They mentioned during the phone call that they sometimes feel a sadness in the house, an inexplicable melancholy that settles in certain rooms, but they attributed it to the age of the structure, to the natural settling of old wood and stone. They do not know that houses remember. They do not know that suffering soaks into walls like water into paper. Kimiko steps inside and the air shifts immediately, becoming heavier, denser, charged with the electricity of the past colliding with the present. Dust motes float in slanted sunlight streaming through the front windows. The living room is different now, new furniture arranged in unfamiliar configurations, different wallpaper with cheerful yellow flowers instead of the dark green pattern she remembers. But the layout is the same. The fireplace is in the same spot. The stairs rise in the same direction. The bones of the house are unchanged. She moves slowly through the hallway, her son David following close behind, his own face tight with emotions he has spent a lifetime trying to understand and failing. He was born in this house. He took his first steps on these floors. He spoke his first words in the bedroom upstairs. But he was too young then to fully comprehend what his mother endured, too American to see what she sacrificed, too protected by his whiteness to understand the particular violence of erasure that happened daily under this roof. Rachel films quietly, respectfully, capturing the way Kimiko's fingers trail along the wall as if reading Braille, as if the house itself holds a language only she can interpret, a vocabulary of trauma written in the grain of the wood. They reach the kitchen and Kimiko stops abruptly in the doorway. Her breath catches audibly. Rachel notices the shift immediately, the way the old woman's shoulders tighten as if bracing for a blow, the way her hand grips the doorframe until her knuckles turn white, the way her eyes widen and then narrow, focusing on something only she can see. This is it. This is the room. This is the space where her identity was systematically dismantled over the course of 15 years. The kitchen is modest, outdated by modern standards but clean and functional. Yellow linoleum floors worn smooth in the pathways between stove and sink and refrigerator. White metal cabinets with chrome handles, dented in places, paint chipped at the corners. A porcelain sink beneath a window that overlooks the back fields where corn grows in endless rows, stretching toward a horizon that must have seemed impossibly far to a young woman who had crossed an ocean only to find herself trapped in a different kind of prison. The stove is newer now, an electric range replacing the old gas one, but it sits in the same spot where the old one stood, occupying the same footprint, haunting the same space. Kimiko steps inside slowly, as if crossing a threshold into the past itself, as if the simple act of entering this room might pull her back through time and trap her there permanently. She closes her eyes, and she is 18 again, arriving in winter, snow covering everything like a white shroud, the cold so intense it felt like knives against her skin, so different from the mild winters of Hiroshima. Robert holding her hand as they approached this house for the first time, his palms sweaty despite the cold, his voice nervous as he told her everything would be fine. His mother would love her. She just needed time to adjust. His mother, Margaret, had been waiting on the porch, arms crossed over her heavy wool coat, breath visible in the frozen air, face unreadable as stone. The introduction had been stiff, formal, conducted in the freezing cold because Margaret did not immediately invite them inside. She had looked Kimiko up and down with eyes that measured and found lacking, eyes that catalogued every difference, every marker of otherness, every reason to reject this foreign girl her son had brought home. "Welcome to America," she had said finally, but her tone suggested Kimiko was anything but welcome, suggested instead that she was an invader, an intruder, a living reminder of a war that had killed boys from this very town. The first weeks had been a careful dance of avoidance and accommodation. Kimiko tried to help, tried to contribute, tried to find some way to be useful, and thereby earn her place in this household. She offered to clean, to cook, to mend, to do anything that might make her presence less burdensome. But Margaret ran the household with an iron grip, with the absolute authority of a woman who had ruled this domain for 30 years and had no intention of relinquishing control. The kitchen was her domain, her kingdom, the one place where her power was absolute and unquestioned. She made it clear through both words and actions that Kimiko was not welcome there. At first it was subtle, communicated through glances and sighs and small acts of territorial assertion. Margaret would rearrange anything Kimiko touched, moving dishes to different shelves, reorganizing drawers, erasing any trace of Kimiko's presence. She would redo tasks Kimiko completed, re-washing dishes that were already clean, re-sweeping floors that held no dirt, making a show of correcting imaginary mistakes. She would cook all the meals herself, insisting that Robert preferred her cooking, that this was how things were done in this house, that there were standards that needed to be maintained. Kimiko, raised to respect elders, to obey without question, to not cause conflict or draw attention, accepted this quietly. She told herself it was temporary, that Margaret needed time to adjust to having another woman in the house, that eventually she would be accepted, that patience and obedience would eventually be rewarded with belonging. But weeks turned into months, and the invisible wall only grew higher, more impenetrable, more absolute. One morning, 3 months after her arrival, Kimiko woke early and decided to make rice for breakfast. She had been craving the taste of home with an intensity that felt like physical hunger, the comfort of something familiar in this alien landscape. She had seen rice in the pantry, a small bag tucked behind the flour and sugar, probably purchased by Robert in some misguided attempt to make her feel welcome. She found a pot, filled it with water, measured the rice carefully the way her mother had taught her, rinsed it 3 times to remove the excess starch. She set it on the stove and lit the gas flame, watching it bloom blue and steady. She was standing there, waiting for it to boil, already anticipating the smell of steaming rice, already imagining how it would taste, when Margaret entered the kitchen. The older woman stopped cold in the doorway, staring at the pot as if Kimiko had set fire to the house, as if she were performing some dangerous ritual that threatened the very foundation of their home. "What are you doing?" Margaret demanded, her voice sharp as broken glass. Kimiko explained softly, respectfully, in her careful English that still carried the rhythms of Japanese, that she was making rice for breakfast. She offered to make enough for everyone. She smiled, hoping to bridge the gap with this small gesture of sharing. Margaret's face hardened into something cold and immovable. "We don't eat that here," she said sharply, each word a small violence. "This is an American household. We eat American food." She crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, took the pot off the stove with her bare hand, ignoring the heat, and dumped the rice into the sink, the white grains scattering across the porcelain like scattered teeth. She turned on the water and washed it all down the drain, erasing it completely. Then she told Kimiko to leave the kitchen. Not asked, told, commanded. Kimiko stood frozen, humiliation burning in her chest like swallowed fire. Tears she refused to let fall, stinging her eyes, blurring her vision. Robert was still asleep upstairs. There was no one to defend her, no one to witness this small cruelty. She retreated to the bedroom, climbed back into bed fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until her vision cleared and her breathing steadied, and she could once again arrange her face into the mask of pleasant compliance that was required for survival. After that incident, the rule became explicit. Margaret told her plainly, in words that left no room for misunderstanding, that she was not to cook in this kitchen. She said the smells would be too strange, that the neighbors might talk, that it was better this way for everyone. She said it was her kitchen, her house, and Kimiko was a guest who needed to remember her place. The word guest was delivered with particular emphasis, a reminder that guests can be asked to leave, that her presence here was conditional, contingent on continued good behavior and absolute obedience. Kimiko tried to talk to Robert about it, but he was caught between two worlds, two women, two loyalties that could not be reconciled. He told her to be patient, that his mother had lost a nephew at Okinawa, that the boy had been 19 years old and had died on a beach thousands of miles from home, that Margaret had helped raise him after his father died, that his death had broken something in her. He told her things would get better, that time would heal these wounds, that eventually his mother would see Kimiko as a person rather than as a symbol of the enemy. But they did not get better. Time passed and nothing changed. For 15 years, Kimiko lived in this house and was never allowed to cook a single meal. She could clean, scrubbing floors until her knees ached and her hands cracked and bled. She could do laundry, standing over the washboard in the basement, the harsh soap eating away at her skin. She could work in the garden, pulling weeds in the summer heat, her back screaming in pain. But the kitchen remained forbidden territory, a space she could enter only to retrieve items Margaret requested, only to clean up after meals she was not allowed to prepare. Every meal was Margaret's. Every dish was American. Pot roast cooked until the meat fell apart. Mashed potatoes with butter and milk. Green bean casserole with cream of mushroom soup and fried onions. Apple pie with a lattice crust. Kimiko ate quietly, thanked her mother-in-law politely after every meal, and swallowed her homesickness along with the bland, unsalted food that tasted like nothing, like the erasure of flavor itself. She found small rebellions where she could, tiny acts of resistance that kept some part of her identity alive. When Margaret went to town for her weekly shopping trip, a 2-hour absence that was the only time Kimiko had the house to herself, she would sometimes boil water and make tea the way her mother taught her, using the good green tea she kept hidden in her dresser drawer, wrapped in cloth to preserve its fragrance. She would stand at the window, cup cradled in both hands, and let herself remember Japan for just a few minutes before hiding all evidence, washing the cup 3 times to remove any trace of the tea's distinctive smell, putting everything back exactly as it had been. She kept a small jar of umeboshi pickled plums hidden in her dresser drawer, beneath her undergarments, eating one secretly when the longing became unbearable, when she felt herself dissolving completely into this American life. The sour, salty taste would explode on her tongue, and for a moment she was a child again, sitting at her mother's table, eating rice and pickles and miso soup, listening to her mother hum while she cooked. She taught herself to cook American food by watching Margaret, memorizing every step, every measurement, every technique, so that one day when she had her own kitchen she would know how to feed her family. But that day felt impossibly far away, a fantasy that sustained her through the endless repetition of days that were all the same. David was born in this house in the spring of 1949, delivered by a doctor who had served in the Pacific and who looked at Kimiko with barely concealed disgust, who handled her roughly, who spoke to her as if she were stupid or deaf. Margaret took over his care immediately, insisting she knew best, that Kimiko was too young, too foreign, too different to raise an American boy properly. She said American babies needed American care, needed to be raised according to American principles. Kimiko was allowed to hold her own son only when Margaret permitted it, only under supervision, only for brief periods before he was taken away again. She nursed him in secret, in the bedroom, away from disapproving eyes, because Margaret insisted that bottle feeding was more modern, more hygienic, more American. Kimiko would sit in the rocking chair by the window, David at her breast, and whisper to him in Japanese, telling him stories her mother had told her, singing him lullabies that had been passed down through generations. She knew Margaret would be furious if she found out, knew she was violating the unspoken rule that Japanese was not to be spoken in this house, but she could not help herself. She needed him to hear her language, her real voice, even if he would never remember it, even if he would grow up speaking only English and thinking only American thoughts. The isolation was suffocating, absolute, totalizing. There were no other Japanese people in this rural Iowa town of 3,000 souls. No one who spoke her language, no one who understood her experience, no one who could confirm that she was real, that she existed, that she was not slowly going insane. The neighbors were polite but distant, their smiles tight and forced, their questions careful and probing. They would ask where she was from, and when she said Japan, their faces would change, would close off, would become masks. They would nod and make excuses to leave. Church on Sundays was an ordeal of stares and whispers that followed her like a physical presence. Children pointed openly, their parents shushing them but not correcting them, not explaining that pointing was rude, not teaching them that she was a human being deserving of basic respect. Women clutched their purses when she passed as if she might steal from them, as if her foreignness made her inherently criminal. Men looked away or looked too long, their gazes invasive, assessing, reducing her to her body, to her otherness. Kimiko learned to make herself small, to occupy as little space as possible, to bow her head, to avoid eye contact, to smile even when her heart was breaking, especially when her heart was breaking. She learned to suppress everything that made her Japanese, to hide her identity like a shameful secret that could destroy her if revealed. She stopped speaking Japanese even to herself, afraid that if she kept the language alive it would slip out at the wrong moment and confirm everyone's worst suspicions about her. She avoided mirrors because her face would always give her away, would always mark her as different, as other, as enemy. She existed in a constant state of erasure, becoming less and less herself with each passing year, each passing month, each passing day. Robert tried in his own inadequate way to make things better. He brought her small gifts from town, a scarf, a book, a bar of nice soap. He told her he loved her, whispered it in the dark when they were alone. He held her when she cried at night, her face pressed into the pillow to muffle the sound so Margaret would not hear. But he could not stand up to his mother. He could not give Kimiko the one thing she needed most, which was simply to be seen, to be valued, to be allowed to exist fully as herself without apology or diminishment. He was a good man in many ways, gentle and kind, but he was weak where it mattered most. He chose peace over justice, chose his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity, chose the path of least resistance every single time. Kimiko understood this about him and loved him anyway, or perhaps loved him less because of it, but stayed because she had no other choice, because leaving would mean admitting failure, would mean returning to Japan in disgrace, would mean confirming everything Margaret believed about her. When Margaret finally died in 1962, collapsing in the garden while picking tomatoes, dead before she hit the ground, Kimiko felt a terrible guilt, because mixed with her grief was an undeniable sense of relief so powerful it frightened her. She cried at the funeral, real tears, because despite everything, Margaret had been her family for 15 years, had been the woman who raised her husband, had been a human being who suffered her own losses and traumas. But she also felt a weight lift from her shoulders, felt herself able to breathe fully for the first time in over a decade. The kitchen was hers now. She could finally cook. She could finally reclaim that part of herself. But by then, she had almost forgotten how. Her mother's recipes had faded from memory like old photographs left in sunlight. Her hands had forgotten the movements, the muscle memory eroded by years of disuse. She had spent so long suppressing that part of herself that she did not know how to reclaim it, did not know if it was even possible to resurrect what had been so thoroughly buried. She tried, haltingly, nervously, to make miso soup, but she could not find miso paste in the local stores and had to order it from a specialty shop in Chicago. And when it finally arrived weeks later, and she made the soup, it tasted wrong, too salty or not salty enough, the proportions all off, nothing like her mother's. She tried to make onigiri rice balls, but the rice would not hold together properly, kept falling apart in her hands, mocking her incompetence. David, now a teenager, wrinkled his nose at the unfamiliar smells and asked if they could just have hamburgers instead, his voice not cruel, but simply honest, simply American. Robert said nothing, but she could see the discomfort in his eyes. could see that he too preferred the familiar foods he had grown up with. So she gave up. She put away the miso paste and the rice molds and the Japanese cookbooks she had mail-ordered. She cooked American food, pot roast and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, the same meals Margaret had made, perpetuating the same erasure that had been inflicted on her. She became the wife and mother they needed her to be, burying Kimiko Nakamura from Hiroshima so deep that sometimes she forgot she had ever existed, forgot there had ever been a girl who spoke Japanese and dreamed in her mother's language and knew how to make proper rice. They left the farmhouse in 1973, moving to a smaller place in town after Robert's health began to fail, his heart damaged by years of smoking and hard physical labor. Kimiko never looked back at the farmhouse as they drove away. She never spoke about those years, never told David what it had been like, never burdened Robert with her resentment or anger or grief. She survived by forgetting, by moving forward, by refusing to dwell on what could not be changed. But the past does not stay buried forever. It has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it, when your defenses are down, when age has worn away the walls you built to protect yourself. After Robert died 10 years ago, his heart finally giving out in his sleep, Kimiko began having dreams about the farmhouse, vivid and detailed dreams that felt more real than her waking life. She dreamed about the kitchen, about standing in the doorway watching Margaret cook, feeling like a ghost in her own life, invisible and insubstantial. She dreamed about the rice she tried to make that first time, watching it swirl down the drain, feeling it as a physical loss, a death of possibility. The dreams were so vivid she would wake up disoriented, unsure what decade she was in, unsure if she was 18 or 86, unsure if Margaret was still alive, unsure if any of the intervening years had actually happened or if she was still trapped in that farmhouse, still forbidden from the kitchen, still slowly disappearing. David noticed his mother becoming more withdrawn, more melancholy, spending long hours staring out windows, not responding when he spoke to her. He suggested therapy, but Kimiko refused, said therapy was for Americans, said she did not need to talk to strangers about her problems. Then Rachel Chen contacted her out of the blue, a voice on the phone explaining that she was making a documentary about Japanese war brides, collecting oral histories, preserving stories that were being lost as that generation aged and died. She had found Kimiko's name through military records, through immigration documents, through the paper trail that proved she had once crossed an ocean to marry a man she barely knew. She asked if Kimiko would be willing to participate, to share her story, to help ensure that this chapter of history was not forgotten. Kimiko's first instinct was to decline. What was the point of dredging up the past? What good could come from reopening old wounds? But Rachel was persistent in a gentle way, calling back, sending letters, explaining why these stories mattered, why they needed to be told. And something about her voice reminded Kimiko of the granddaughter she never had, the descendant who might have carried forward some part of her Japanese heritage if circumstances had been different. So she agreed to one interview, then another, and slowly, carefully over the course of months she began to tell her story, began to excavate the memories she had buried, began to speak aloud things she had never told anyone. It was Rachel who suggested returning to the farmhouse. She said it might bring closure, might help Kimiko process what she had endured, might allow her to reclaim some power over a narrative that had been defined by powerlessness. Kimiko resisted at first, could not imagine why she would want to go back to that place, could not see how returning to the site of her erasure would do anything but re-traumatize her. But the dreams kept coming, growing more intense, more insistent, and she realized that some part of her needed to face it, needed to stand in that kitchen one more time, not as a frightened 18-year-old girl, but as an 86-year-old woman who had survived, who had endured, who had earned the right to reclaim her own story. So here she is, standing in the kitchen where she was forbidden to cook, where her identity was systematically dismantled, where she learned that survival sometimes requires becoming someone else entirely. The room is smaller than she remembered, less intimidating, just a kitchen, just a room with appliances and cabinets and a window. But the emotions it holds are vast, oceanic, threatening to drown her if she lets them. She walks slowly to the stove, places her hand on it. It is cold, inert, just metal and ceramic. She closes her eyes and remembers the day she tried to make rice, the shame of watching Margaret dump it in the sink, The realization that she had no power here, no voice, no right to exist as herself. She remembers standing at this window washing dishes 3 times a day, watching Robert work in the fields, wondering if this was all her life would ever be, wondering if she would die in this house without ever having truly lived. She remembers holding David as a baby, sneaking into the kitchen late at night just to feel like she had some claim to this space, some right to exist in it, rocking him and whispering Japanese lullabies and knowing that he would never remember, that this small rebellion would leave no trace. Rachel approaches quietly, camera still rolling, capturing everything. She asks Kimiko what she is feeling right now, in this moment. Kimiko is silent for a long time, so long that Rachel begins to worry she has pushed too hard, asked for too much. Then Kimiko speaks, her voice soft but steady, stronger than Rachel has ever heard it. She says she is feeling angry. After all these years of suppressing it, denying it, redirecting it inward where it could only harm herself, she is finally allowing herself to feel angry. Angry at Margaret for her cruelty, her fear, her inability to see past her own trauma to recognize Kimiko's humanity. Angry at Robert for his weakness, his silence, his failure to protect her when protection was what she needed most. Angry at the town, the neighbors, the church community who made her feel like an intruder in her own life. Angry at America for promising refuge and delivering isolation. Angry at herself for accepting it, for shrinking, for disappearing, for not fighting back, for choosing survival over dignity. But also, she says, and her voice changes here, becomes something else, something that sounds almost like pride. She is feeling something else too. She is feeling proud. Proud that she survived when survival felt impossible. Proud that she raised a son in this hostile place and managed to give him a good life even while her own life was being stolen from her. Proud that she did not let them break her completely, did not let them erase her entirely. She may have hidden parts of herself, may have buried her language and her culture and her identity, but she never lost them. They were always there, dormant, but not dead, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And now, standing here as an old woman with more years behind her than ahead of her, she is reclaiming them. She is saying to the ghost of Margaret Henderson, to the memory of her younger self, to the walls of this kitchen that witnessed her erasure, that she was here, that she mattered, that her story deserves to be told and remembered and honored. David steps forward, tears streaming down his face, his composure finally breaking after holding it together for the entire visit. He tells his mother he is sorry, the words coming out in great heaving sobs. Sorry he did not understand what was happening. Sorry he did not see her suffering even though it was right in front of him. Sorry he wrinkled his nose at her Japanese food when she tried to cook it. Sorry he asked for hamburgers instead. Sorry he grew up American and comfortable while she was dying inside. Sorry it took him 65 years to understand what she sacrificed for him. Kimiko turns to him, places a weathered hand on his cheek, feels the wetness of his tears. She tells him it was not his fault that he was a child, that children cannot be expected to understand adult complexities. She made choices to protect him, to help him fit in, to spare him the burden of her pain and her otherness. She wanted him to be American in a way she could never be, wanted him to belong in a way that was denied to her. But those choices came with costs she is only now beginning to calculate, only now beginning to understand. She tells him that she loves him, that she is proud of the man he became, proud that he is kind and thoughtful and nothing like the people who made her life so difficult. But she also tells him that she mourns the parts of herself she could not share with him, the language she could not teach him because she was afraid it would mark him as other, the food she could not make for him because she had forgotten how, and because she was afraid he would reject it, the stories she could not tell because they were too painful, too raw, too revealing of her own vulnerability. She mourns the grandmother he never knew, the one who died in Hiroshima, the one whose recipes and wisdom and love were lost when Kimiko crossed the ocean. She mourns the connection to Japan that he will never have, the heritage that was stolen from both of them. David embraces her and they stand there in the kitchen, 2 generations trying to bridge a gap created by war and racism and silence and fear. Rachel continues filming, knowing this is the heart of the story, this moment of recognition and grief and love. She thinks about her own grandmother, also a war bride, also a woman who suffered in silence, also someone whose story she is only now beginning to understand. She thinks about how many stories like this exist, how many women crossed oceans and lost themselves, how many sacrifices were made and never acknowledged, how many identities were erased in the name of assimilation and peace. Rachel asks if Kimiko wants to cook something now, here in this kitchen, as a symbolic act of reclamation, of taking back the power that was stolen from her. She offers to help, to film it, to make it part of the documentary. Kimiko considers this carefully, looking around the kitchen, imagining herself at the stove, imagining the smell of miso soup or steaming rice filling this space that has been denied those smells for so long. Then she shakes her head slowly. She says she does not need to cook here. She has already done what she came to do. She has faced the room that haunted her dreams. She has spoken the truth that she kept silent for decades. She has refused to let this place have power over her anymore. The kitchen does not define her. Margaret's cruelty does not define her. The years of silence and erasure do not define her. She defines herself. And she is more than this room, more than those years of suffering, more than the frightened girl who arrived in the snow. She is Kimiko Nakamura, survivor, mother, war bride, woman who crossed an ocean and endured what should have broken her, but did not. That is enough. That is everything. She does not need to perform her reclamation for the camera. The reclamation is internal, private, already complete. They leave the farmhouse as the sun begins to set, golden light spilling across the fields, turning the corn into waves of amber and bronze. Kimiko takes one last look at the kitchen window from outside, seeing it from this angle, from the perspective of someone leaving rather than someone trapped inside. Then she turns away decisively. She does not need to come back here again. She has said what needed to be said. The past has been acknowledged. The silence has been broken. The story has been told. Rachel asks if she can share this story in the documentary, if she can let others know what happened here, if she can use Kimiko's real name and real details. Kimiko nods without hesitation. She says yes. Tell them. Tell them all. Tell them about the war brides who came to America full of hope and were met with suspicion and cruelty and systematic erasure. Tell them about the kitchens they were banned from, the languages they were forced to forget, the identities they had to hide just to survive. Tell them about the cost of assimilation, the price of survival, the violence of being made to disappear. Tell them so that it is not forgotten, so that their granddaughters and great-granddaughters know what was sacrificed, what was endured, what was lost, and what, against all odds, was preserved. Tell them so, that it never happens again. As they drive away, the farmhouse growing smaller in the rearview mirror, David asks his mother if she will teach him to cook Japanese food. Real Japanese food, the kind her mother made, the recipes that have been lost for so long. Kimiko smiles. A real smile that transforms her face, makes her look younger, makes Rachel see the girl she must have been before the war and the marriage and the erasure. She says yes. She says it is not too late. She says she will teach him everything she can remember, and together they will rediscover what was almost lost. They will call her cousins in Japan, the ones she has not spoken to in decades. They will ask for recipes. They will learn together. Rachel films this moment from the front seat, capturing the way the setting sun illuminates Kimiko's face, the way decades of pain and silence seem to lift, just slightly, making room for something new. Not healing exactly, because some wounds do not heal, because some losses cannot be recovered, but acknowledgement, witnessing, the simple, powerful act of saying, "This happened, I was here, my story matters, and I refuse to let it be forgotten." The farmhouse disappears completely in the rearview mirror, becoming just a memory, just a story, just a place where terrible things happened, but do not have to keep happening. Kimiko does not look back. She looks forward, toward home, toward her own kitchen, toward the recipes she will remember and the meals she will finally, after all these years, allow herself to make without shame, without fear, without the ghost of Margaret Henderson standing in the doorway telling her she does not belong. She belongs. She has always belonged. The question was never whether she belonged, but whether America would make space for her to exist as herself. And now, at 86 years old, she is finally permitting herself to believe that she does not need America's permission. She does not need anyone's permission. She is enough. Her story is enough. Her survival is enough. And that, Finally, is everything.